Floyd Mayweather once said nothing in the world is perfect except his boxing record. Mayweather made being undefeated an important part of being a fighter. This is translated over to MMA, where undefeated records are much more rare, with the highest profile record being Khabib's 29-0. Many MMA fighters have been brilliant, fighting storied careers and doing all they can to hold on to that unbeaten record, but eventually they run into a fight or a fighter who just ends up being their kryptonite to give them their first loss of their career. So that's what we're focusing on today. This is the fight franchise and when legendary undefeated streaks came to an end. Number 10. Israel Adesanya. The arguable greatest middleweight of all time, if not number 2, began in MMA in 2012 after competing in boxing and kickboxing. He would go on a brilliant run upon starting in MMA and would debut in the UFC in February of 2018 and went on a 5-fight win streak and secured some brilliant wins and earned an interim title shot against Kelvin Gastelum, beating him in the fight of the year. He would face off against Robert Whittaker for undisputed gold and would KO him in the second round to become undisputed middleweight champion and took his career to 18-0. He beat Yoel Romero in one of the most boring fights in MMA history in his next fight, and behind closed doors at UFC 253 he beat the undefeated Paulo Costa, who could have also made this list. The co-main event of UFC 253, Jan Blachowicz would defeat Dominic Reyes for vacant light heavyweight gold. With no clear challenger for Israel Adesanya and with his star shining after the Costa win, he decided to do what very few have done and become champ. Izzy went up to light heavyweight and faced Jan Blachowicz for his light heavyweight title. Jan proved to be just too big and strong for Izzy, where they had a close 3 rounds, but the championship rounds, Jan used his superior grappling and size to beat Izzy and edged the unanimous decision victory, and Israel would lose his undefeated record. Izzy would be gracious in defeat, stating he dared to be great, but in Stylebender's story and legendary MMA career, his first loss will always be quoted and remembered as his first true humbling. Number 9. Darren Till. During the peak era of Conor McGregor, how you used your time in front of a microphone was just as important as how you performed in the octagon. Darren Till would come into the UFC flying the flag of his home city of Liverpool and would secure a finish in his debut in the UFC. He would draw his next fight and secure decisions to work his way up the welterweight rankings and face Donald Cowboy Cerrone in the main event of a fight night where the much bigger Till steamrolled over Cerrone, where he won via stoppage and would rock the mic after the fight. Till had the makings of a star, a fan-friendly and fun striking style, a brash say-what-you-want personality, and a growing fan base. This led him to a showdown versus former title contender Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in his hometown of Liverpool. In a close and competitive fight, both guys put on a striking battle on the feet, where Till got the decision win to take him to 17 wins, 1 draw and 0 losses. This climbed Till up the welterweight rankings, skipping past everyone to a title shot versus Tyron Woodley. The UFC saw Till as a potential superstar, who before the fight, Till was made a favourite by the odds makers. Till would be schooled by Woodley on the feet, and when on the ground, Woodley cinched up a Darce choke to give Darren Till his first loss of his MMA career, ending his undefeated streak to give him 17 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw. Till's career now sits at 18 wins, 1 draw and 5 losses, which showed after Till's O was gone, he was never and has never been the same. Number 8. Cat Zingano. One of the biggest pioneers of women's MMA in the early days, Cat Zingano did so much to help the sport grow. Zingano trained wrestling in high school and also competed in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, where she made the transition into MMA. She would fight in multiple small-time promotions where women would compete, and eventually compete in women's focused promotion Invicta. She went on a streak of 7-0 during this time, securing some brilliant stoppage wins, and was known as one of the best women's fighters in the world. She had a lot of hype, and once women could compete in the UFC, she would be signed by the UFC and face Miesha Tate in a fight of the night, securing the brilliant stoppage win, but she would unfortunately get injured, losing a chance to compete as a coach on The Ultimate Fighter. During this time, Zingano suffered the biggest loss of her life, as her husband tragically took his own life. But after returning from injury and her personal tragedy, she would face future GOAT of MMA, Amanda Nunes, and secured the brilliant TKO against her, setting up a mega fight versus Ronda Rousey. Rousey had lived up to all of her hype, being a dominant champ and securing a bunch of stoppage wins, and becoming a face of women's MMA. Zingano for all these years had so much hype and was a pioneer of women's MMA, about to have the biggest fight of her life. Undefeated champion Ronda Rousey taking on undefeated challenger Cat Zingano, where we were about to find out who was the best women's fighter on the planet. This was Zingano's chance to show the world why she was so great and such a hype talent. Zingano would rush in, get caught in an armbar, and in 14 seconds the fight was over. From an undefeated fighter with so much hype, talent and potential in her biggest professional fight, losing instantly. All that hard work and effort put in for that performance. This was a crushing defeat for Zingano, whose UFC career just didn't work out. However, she has gone to Bellator and is 4-0 there to take her career to 14-4. This was an unfortunate way to lose your undefeated streak, but Zingano has shown true heart to keep fighting after all these years after this loss and her personal tragedy. Number 7. Cain Velasquez. It is very rare for fighters to become UFC champions in their first 10 MMA fights, but that is what Cain Velasquez managed. He started in MMA and would destroy the competition in his first 2 fights to go 2-0 and would be one of the biggest heavyweight prospects in the world. Cain would be signed by the UFC and would continue destroying the competition in the UFC, winning his first 3 in the promotion, all by stoppage to go 5-0. His KO streak would be stopped by Czech Congo, where Cain won by decision instead. He would finish Ben Rothwell at UFC 104, and at UFC 110 he would KO Big Nog to take him to 8-0 with 7 stoppages. There was no denying Cain. He would face Brock Lesnar for undisputed heavyweight gold at UFC 121, where Brock was coming fresh off his legendary comeback win versus Shane Carwin. Cain would batter Brock Lesnar and beat one of the biggest stars in the sport's history and became undisputed champion, where he looked like the new era of heavyweight, who was well-rounded and had insane skills and cardio. He would have his first title defense against a highly skilled and dangerous Junior Dos Santos, who was on a brilliant 8-fight win streak. This was a hugely anticipated matchup, as it would be the first UFC event to be shown on Fox TV. Cain went in defending his heavyweight title and his undefeated streak, where he lost it all in just over a minute, with Junior Dos Santos KOing Cain in the first round in one of the most legendary moments in heavyweight history. Cain would avenge this loss and got back his title, but injuries and losses added up, which ended up ruining Cain Velasquez's career. Who knows, if he never lost this fight to Junior Dos Santos, maybe he could have amassed a streak which cemented him as the best heavyweight ever. Number 6. Lyoto Machida. Welcome to the Machida era. The Dragon would get started in MMA in 2003 and would compete in Japan across multiple promotions, securing brilliant wins and performances. He secured some great wins in Japan, stopping Stephan Bonner and Rich Franklin, and beat BJ Penn in an openweight bout. He would go on a streak of 8-0 and was slowly becoming one of the most exciting fighters in the world. He would move down to light heavyweight upon moving to America and would be signed by the UFC. He would win 3 decisions upon entering the UFC and then submit Sokoju to take his career to 12-0. He beat Tito Ortiz and then brutally KO'd Thiago Silva to go 6-0 in the UFC and 14-0 in his career, where he would earn a title shot versus the undefeated Rashad Evans. Both men were undefeated, and Lyoto Machida would secure the monumental KO in this mega fight to become undisputed light heavyweight champion, and as Joe Rogan said, welcome to the Machida era. He would defend his title against fellow Brazilian Mauricio Shogun Rua, where they both went to battle at UFC 104, where Lyoto got the nod on the judges' scorecard, with many fans thinking Shogun should have won. This decision win was the catalyst for a rematch where both men squared off at UFC 113, where Shogun dropped Machida and finished him on the ground with a flurry of punches, and just like that, the Machida era was over. He had the first loss of his career, and he would never reach the lofty heights that he managed in his 16-0 career streak, having mixed success in his career where he has gone to Bellator and his career is currently 26-12. Machida went on that brilliant streak to take over MMA, but once he lost his O, it all slowly came crumbling down. Number 5. Rashad Evans. So we know who he lost his title to and his unbeaten streak to from the previous entry, but how did it all come about? Rashad Evans would begin his career in MMA in 2004, where he would go 5-0 and be scouted for the second season of The Ultimate Fighter, where Rashad would go on to win the season and earn a contract in the UFC. He would go on a streak of decision wins to take his career to 8-0. He would secure 2 KOs in his next fights, which included a vicious head kick to take his career to 10-0, where he would be paired with superstar of the sport at the time, Tito Ortiz, where both men fought to a draw, which kept Rashad's unbeaten record intact. He would beat Michael Bisping in his next fight and secured the biggest win of his career, KOing Chuck Liddell to take his career to 12 wins and 1 draw and still undefeated. This win earned him a title shot against Forrest Griffin, where he would finish Griffin and become light heavyweight champion. This would see Rashad put his title on the line against the previously mentioned Lyoto Machida, and also his unbeaten record up against Machida's, where he would be KO'd by Machida, losing his belt and tasting defeat in his MMA career for the first time. Rashad would build his way back up to a title fight against John Jones, going on a 4-fight win streak, but was unable to regain the belt he previously held. The manner in which he lost his fight against another undefeated fighter defending his title, this was a massive loss and definitely earns a spot on the list. Number 4, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. The arguable best women's strawweight of all time, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, would compete in Muay Thai, building and developing a brilliant striking game. So when it came time to move to MMA, Joanna had a striking game years ahead of all the strawweights of her era. She would start in MMA going 6-0 and had a lot of hype and be signed by the UFC UFC, where she would beat Juliana Lima and Claudio Gadelha to earn a title shot versus the inaugural women's strawweight champ, Carla Esparza. She would destroy Carla on the feet with her superior striking to become world champion and would slowly become the face of the women's strawweight division. Joanna buzzsawed through all the challenges in her division, defending her title with brilliant striking and her confident attitude. She managed to take her career to 14-0 and was on 5 title defenses and would be defending her title against Rose Namajunas. Joanna ramped up the trash talk as she was becoming hugely popular and would claim herself as the boogie woman of the strawweight division. Joanna felt like an unbeatable champion who was never going to be beat. Her striking was levels above all the other strawweights. It just felt like Rose was a lamb being sent to slaughter, which is why it was unbelievable when Rose managed to KO Joanna in the first round to secure the amazing upset and dethrone Joanna and end her unbeaten streak. Joanna felt like the unbeatable phenom of the women's strawweight division, and after tasting her first loss in her career after dominating a division, was never the same. She never recaptured her title and was unable to find that form which took her on a 14-fight win streak. She did put on brilliant fights after this, especially her 5-round war versus Zhang Weili. Nonetheless, this streak ender was a massive moment in women's MMA which changed strawweight forever. Number 3. Ben Askren. Ben Askren through his high school and college years would be a tremendous wrestler, competing and winning the NCAA championships. This led to a wrestling career where he would compete in multiple tournaments, eventually taking his skills to the 2008 Olympics, but would lose in the quarterfinals. Following his stint in the Olympics, Askren decided to transition into MMA, where he would win his first 3 fights and be signed by Bellator. He would compete in the Bellator Welterweight Grand Prix and win the tournament to become the world champion and go 7-0 in his MMA career. He would rack up some brilliant wins and title defenses and would take his career to 12-0, where he would opt to compete in Japan for 1 championship. He won his first fight in 1 championship, and in his next fight he would win the welterweight title, taking his career to 14-0. His next fight would be a no contest due to an eye poke, but win his next 4 defending his title to go 18-0 with 1 no contest. Many thought Askren was the best welterweight in the world, not in the UFC, and Askren himself talked a lot of trash, saying he would easily beat Khabib. Dana White was not a big fan of Ben Askren, but would swap him for Demetrius Johnson, where Askren could finally back all that trash talk he was saying of being the best welterweight in the world. His UFC debut, he faced Robbie Lawler in a fight where he got battered early on but secured a bulldog choke which was protested as an early stoppage. Askren talked loads of trash where he earned a matchup against Jorge Masvidal, who was coming off a KO win of Darren Till. At the time of the matchup, Ben Askren was a world champion in 2 promotions, an Olympian, and had 19 wins, 0 losses, with 1 no contest, while Masvidal had 33 wins, 13 losses. So it was unbelievable when Masvidal would sprint across the cage and KO Askren in 5 seconds to end his unbeaten streak. Askren was never the same. He was humiliated by the greatest KO ever and would lose his next fight to Damian Maia and retire from the sport. Askren outside of the UFC was a dominant unbeaten champ. Once he entered the UFC, it all came crashing to an abrupt end, courtesy of one of the best KOs ever. Number 2. Chris Weidman. Another brilliant wrestler like Ben Askren, Chris Weidman would begin in MMA in 2009, fighting in the Ring of Combat, taking his career to 4-0, where he beat future UFC fighter Uriah Hall, who would later be a part of one of Chris Weidman's worst moments of his career. He would be signed by the UFC competing in the middleweight division, which was being ruled by the best fighter in the world at the time, Anderson Silva. Weidman went 5-0 in the UFC with some brilliant wins and stoppages to take him to 9-0, which earned him a title shot against Anderson Silva, who needed new opponents as he had already beaten most of the division. Weidman was an underdog, about to face the best fighter in the world. Weidman shocked the world by KOing the taunting Anderson Silva in the second round to become middleweight champion and dethroned the best champion we had ever seen at the time. He rematched Silva to prove it wasn't a fluke, but the fight would be brought to a halt due to Silva's unfortunate leg break. Weidman would defend his title versus the previously mentioned Lyoto Machida and then Vitor Belfort, where Weidman was becoming a fan favourite and beginning his title reign. With his career at 13-0, he would face former Strikeforce champion Luke Rockhold, where both men went to war, but Chris Weidman during the fight threw a spinning wheel kick where Rockhold took down Weidman and pummeled him. Rockhold would win the fight in the following round, and Weidman lost his title and faced the first defeat of his career. Weidman has never been the same after this first loss, losing 6 of his next 8, which included a nasty leg break versus Uriah Hall. Chris Weidman, once he dethroned Anderson Silva, was on top of the world. The second he tasted his first loss in his MMA career, he would fall from the top in devastating fashion. Number 1. Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey would be a phenomenon in early women's MMA. Ronda got started in MMA in 2011 after winning bronze in the Olympics and would go 2-0 and end up in Strikeforce, which was where women's MMA was being pushed. Ronda had that it factor. We all knew she was a special talent, winning her first 4 fights via armbar to earn a title shot for Strikeforce Gold versus Miesha Tate. Ronda did the same again, armbarring Miesha Tate to become Strikeforce champion and defended her title once again by armbar. Strikeforce would be acquired by the UFC, where Rousey would be bestowed the UFC Women's Bantamweight title, where she defended her title versus Liz Caramouche in the first women's fight in UFC history. She would win that fight by, you guessed it, armbar, and she would defend her title versus Miesha Tate in a heated bout, winning that by armbar as well, to take her career to 8-0. She would win her next 2 fights via KO, where she was beginning to show her striking. She would then beat the previously mentioned Kat Zingano and KO Betch Correia to take her career to 12-0. Rousey was a superstar and one of the faces of the UFC and MMA, and becoming a mainstream star. She looked like a phenom and unbeatable, and people were beginning to compare her to greats in other combat sports. Ronda would defend her title versus Holly Holm at UFC 193, where everyone just thought it would be another win for the dominant Rousey, as it was all we knew and had seen from her. No one was on her level, which is why the whole world was shocked when Holm schooled Rousey on the feet and brutally KO'd her with an amazing head kick, and the whole world and Rousey was in disbelief. Rousey was an unbeaten phenom, dominating any woman who stepped in the cage with her, but it was all over. The aura was broken and Rousey would struggle to cope with the loss after being so dominant. She would return and face Amanda Nunes and lose in just under 50 seconds and would retire from the sport. This is easily number one. When everyone else tasted defeat, they carried on fighting and still had that fighter deep inside them. The second Rousey lost to home, she was exposed. Her undefeated aura had been shattered, and so had she, shown by the fact she didn't even show up against Amanda Nunes, and we have never seen her in the octagon again. Did you enjoy the video? Let us know down in the comments below. What do you think is the most legendary undefeated streak that came to an end? Put that down in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more MMA and fight content coming soon. We hope you enjoyed the video and we'll catch you in the next one.